Hi, my name is Karen Fabian and I'm the founder of Bare Bones Yoga, and I'm here today to do video number 4 of my Learn Anatomy Challenge. And if you've been following along, doing videos 1, 2, and 3, you have an idea of what the focus of this challenge is. If you're just jumping in here at video number 4, the first thing I do is go back and take a look at video number 1, 2, 3, because they really do build on one another. What this challenge is meant to do is it's meant to take you on a little journey through these 9 videos, what will be a 9 video free training, to cover some of the key aspects of anatomy for yoga teachers. And I wanted to provide this as a way to kind of pull back the curtain, so to speak, on what some of these key concepts are. Understanding that for many teachers, the concept of anatomy is such a broad subject, and understanding or knowing what to understand in this broad subject and then applying it to yoga teaching can be such a big hurdle. And for many teachers, they of course get anatomy as part of their 200-hour training, but oftentimes once they leave training, they really don't retain a lot of that information, and so they're looking for additional ways to supplement their learning. And while I have online courses and books and different manuals on anatomy, I wanted to provide a short training that would give you a window into some of the information, and then if your interest is piqued, give you access and information about other things that I can offer you that will go into some of these things more in depth. So let me just remind you as well, if you haven't downloaded the guide to the challenge, the first thing I would say is go on to the link, which I'm going to include here in the description of this video, and you can download the 2-page PDF guide that will take you through each video, what each video will be about, and access to the videos via a live link to this YouTube channel. And then it also goes through what some of the goals of the challenge are and gives you access to some of these other resources I have, so that if, as you watch these, you think, you know, I really want to dive deeper into this subject, you'll be able to access a link to my anatomy manual, which is a 200-page manual on anatomy, as well as my online course, my blueprint course, which is my most comprehensive course on anatomy. And remember, if you're doing this challenge, you're able to get a free hour of coaching from me, yoga coaching. It could be to go over questions about anatomy, or it might just be to go over different teacher topics, things related to personal development, maybe working with private students, working with students with injuries, sequencing. When I do one-on-one sessions with teachers, it covers really a wide range of topics. So feel free, if you're doing this challenge, to just send me an email and let me know you'd like to take advantage of this free offer. I normally charge $150 for these one-on-one sessions, so to get it for free is a good deal. So what we're going to go over in today's session is we're going to talk about what bones, joints, and muscles do I need to know as a yoga teacher. And again, because this is a free training and really is meant to kind of pique your interest, I'm not going to go into all the content. For that, you can go to my anatomy manual or my online course, or both. Sometimes people like to read about it and then participate in kind of an online learning process. But I want to go through just kind of the general rationale behind this, and then talk about a couple of parts of the body and their application to yoga teaching. So let's first talk about just the idea of, as a yoga teacher, do you need to know every bone in the body, every muscle in the body, every joint, down to the nitty-gritty? And I think this is one of the things that, you know, there are a lot of us out there who love anatomy. And I think as a result, sometimes it can be overwhelming for newer teachers that are just starting to really get a handle on the subject when they see all these articles that go into different things about things really at a fine-tuned detail level. And so what I like to do is, while I do like to go there every once in a while for my own kind of education, I really like to figure out what are the key things that teachers need to know so that they can apply this information to their teaching in an easy and understandable way. So in the anatomy manual, in the course, I go over what are the key bones of the body. Let's just take bones to start out. that you'd want to know from a teaching perspective. So keeping in mind, let's just take the hand and the foot for instance. So in the foot alone, there's 26 bones. And it's not, in my opinion, it's not necessary that you know every single bone, but what might come up is you might, for instance, have somebody talk to you about plantar fasciitis. And so that is a thickening of the tissue of the fascia that runs on the sole of the foot. And it actually runs from the heel, the calcaneus of the foot, up to the toes. And I remember when we did cadaver dissections about 1.5 years ago, I went to a training on that. And you literally could stick your hand underneath the thick band of fascia, and it's really, really tight. So if any of you have ever had plantar fasciitis, if you get an opportunity to do dissections, you'll really get an appreciation for why you were so uncomfortable, because that tissue, that fascia is super, super taut. But the point being that that is a perfect example of a student, let's say, comes to you and has plantar fasciitis, and then you go off and you research it because maybe you're not super familiar with the condition, and you find out more about the bones of the foot in the context of that question. Otherwise, I don't necessarily go into bones of the foot and bones of the hand when I do teacher trainings on anatomy, because I like to think about things from the perspective of what do teachers need to understand that has to do with gross motor movement. As you can imagine, movements through the hand are fine motor movement. And so, of course, things like the humerus and the radius and ulna and the femur and tibia and fibula, you know, just bones of the thoracic area, the lumbar area, these are definitely bones that you'd want to get a good handle on. When we start to look at joints, that again brings up, there are a lot of different kinds of joints. But let's think about what are the most common joints that we're talking about when we're thinking about movement. Well, of course, yes, I'm sure if you're watching you're saying everything, and you're right. But let's think about things like, of course, shoulders and hips. And so we're talking, of course, about, you can just see by looking at them, ball and socket. So these joints are going to afford us a lot of movement. And then when we think about, you know, a joint of the body that really gives people a lot of concern and even confusion is the knee joint. And this joint is, you know, really a hybrid joint. It is a hinge joint primarily. So you can see here I'm moving it kind of like the hinge on a door. That's actually a kind of a louver door, so a little bit of a different example, but just kind of your standard door hinge. That's what we're talking about. But you know, of course, from doing different movements in yoga practice, that you can move your shin side to side. So it does work a little bit like a pivot joint as well as a hinge joint. And this is where we can start to get into some challenges when we start to apply these movements in the yoga pose, because let's just take a pose like pigeon or standing pigeon. The hip is going to give us the most movement because that's a ball and socket. The knee is not going to give us as much movement because that's that hybrid joint. That's a hinge as well as a little bit of a pivot. So if we take a student and we ask them to move from their hip and move from their knee, so open their hip or externally rotate their hip as well as flex their knee, right? So here we're flexing it, and laterally turn or medially turn the shin, so move the shin towards the midline of the body. Now we're kind of using this ability of this pivot hinge hybrid joint to move the shin this way, but this is really where most of the movement should occur from, because this is the movement that gives us more flexibility, more mobility, because it's a ball and a socket. So understanding those differences between those two joints in the application of the movement is really, really important. And now we're kind of staying at this level of gross motor movement. We're not getting into fine-tuned movement, but it can be really, really effective. Think about the difference between taking pigeon this way in terms of potential problems for the knee versus taking it on the ground, where now I'm leveraging the floor. And so if I'm really not aware of moving from my hip, there's a big chance that I'm going to put a lot of pressure on my knee. So this, from the perspective of understanding joints, just gives you a little window into some of what's covered in my manual, my course, and some of what I really feel is helpful for teachers to know. So now let's go into muscles. So obviously there are lots and lots of muscles in the body. And more these days, people are focusing on fascia and its importance to movement. And so fascia is kind of like the Spider-Man suit of connective tissue. It's really, kind of the wrapping around all of the muscle. I remember I read something, Tom Myers described fascia as kind of that outer layer into which all the muscles are poured. And I thought that was such a great analogy, or such a great description. And it's true. So we can't forget about the importance of fascia and the presence, merely just the presence of fascia. In fact, kind of thinking back to when I originally did cadaver dissections in college, when I was in the physical therapy program up the street here in Boston at Boston University, we didn't even go into fascia. All of it was pre-dissected for us. The muscles were what people thought we wanted to see. But now, when I did my most recent cadaver dissection a year and a half ago, we definitely spent a lot of time with skin and the different subcutaneous layers and fascia, and then went to muscle. It probably took us 3 days before we got to muscle. So it really is important to understand that over time, the study of anatomy changes, even though the bones and joints and all of that is the same. How we look at the body changes as research is made available to us and as our understanding grows. So getting back to muscles, so now, of course, lots of muscles, but think about muscles involved in gross movement. So if we're kind of going to stay with the hip joint, and we can even kind of bring in some of the knee, one of the big muscles that students ask about a lot is the psoas. So this is a big hip flexor muscle. It starts on the low back and it ends on the femur. Now there, right away, I'm kind of, I don't want to say I'm glossing over details, but for the purposes of presenting this information to you, I'm staying with kind of the general presentation of the muscle. So lower back, lumbar spine to femur, right? If we want to get more detail, we can talk about what part of the lumbar spine, the lesser trochanter of the femur, which is a specific part where the muscle inserts. But again, my emphasis for teachers is, yes, study that, yes, know where to look that up, yes, maybe remember it, but more importantly, understand generally where these muscles are and what is their application to movement. So if you think about the psoas, lower back to femur, right, top of femur, we're talking about something that flexes the hip, that's its concentric contraction, and then to lengthen it, we're talking about this movement, so taking the hip into extension. So if we look at a posture like warrior one, and the lower body kind of alignment, this is the hip that, of course, is an extension, right? So the angle is broadened from here to here, and this is the hip that is in flexion. So this is a really common muscle for students that can get tight, especially if they're doing a lot of sitting or doing active contractions like running or rowing or cycling a lot. And when we start to bring in the knee, now we can think about what muscle runs from the pelvis to the knee. Well, if you have some familiarity with the quadriceps, one of the heads of the quadriceps actually starts in the pelvis, and it's the quadriceps femoris. See, I almost forgot the name. The quadriceps femoris. And so this part of the quadriceps, quad four heads of this muscle, begins on the pelvis and ends on the knee. And it also is a hip flexor, but because it ends on the knee, it's going to affect the knee as well. And so you probably know that the quads, the quadriceps muscle, extend the knee and the hamstrings bend. So these are kind of fundamental muscles to know. But, again, you can know them, but then how do we now bring the knowledge of these muscles into teaching? So when perhaps you're creating themes for your classes on different anatomical ideas, you could bring in a hip flexor theme where you might want to do things to strengthen the hip flexors, active strengthening, or you might want to do things like lunges to lengthen them. And so this brings into play some concepts around, well, what do muscles do? Sometimes they actively contract, sometimes they're not, the limbs aren't moving, but there is a contraction, that's your isometric contraction. Muscles can work in pairs and do work in pairs, so oftentimes a common paired group is muscles behind the back that draw the shoulder blades closer together. Those are your rhomboids. When they do their job, they stretch the muscles in the front, which are the pectoral muscles. So this just kind of gives you an overview of a mindset to take, rather than feeling like you need to digest everything and you need to know every single muscle, I've broken it down for you in both the anatomy manual and the online course so that you don't have to kind of think about, well, what muscles would be key for me to know? And then once you get a sense of the muscles, the next video that we're going to go over, I'm going to just take a look here, is applying anatomical knowledge to poses. And so this is, kind of a progression. Video number 1, 2, and 3 were kind of earlier pieces. Now we're talking about bones, joints, and muscles that you need to know, and then we're going to apply them to poses. So I've given you already a little preview of that here, and we'll go into it in more detail in video number 5. So before I end, I just want to remind you, if you haven't downloaded the guide, the link will be attached here in the description. If you want more information about these additional resources, the links to the anatomy guide and the online course, the blueprint course, are both in that PDF guide that you will download. And then don't forget, if you'd like to take advantage of a free coaching session with me, just send me an email, karen@barebonesyoga.com, and we'll set that up. So I hope that you've enjoyed video number 4. Video number 5 is on the way soon. And thank you so much for watching, and namaste.